the little girl quietly opened the door and looked inside the chambers. She asked the girl if she could come inside. Wanting to please her mistress, the little girl had prepared a delicious fruity hour especially for her. The mistress told her it was okay to come inside. The delighted girl, having penetrated inside the room, still could not stop talking. She even suggested to her mistress that they go to the garden together to pick white roses in bloom. However, the girl asked Elma to leave. Because of her chatter was very difficult to concentrate on studies and other, no less important matters. After bowing out, the upset little girl left the room. If the protagonist had not told her her desire directly, then it is unlikely that this clingy girl would have left her so easily. Such an act seemed rather cruel at first glance, but the girl tried to remain honest to herself, as well as to that girl. It would be difficult to explain to her maid that in the body of her mistress at the moment, there was a completely different person. All events began to develop in the dream of the protagonist about 1 week ago. It seemed quite fascinating to the girl that she had managed to get into a conscious dream. She realized that she was asleep, but her mind was very well aware of what was happening. Someone from the study called out to Miss Lee. Even in her dream, she had to be interviewed. A certain girl was waiting for the protagonist in a beautiful flowering garden. Miss Lee obediently sat down at a small table to begin answering the questions asked. The stranger asked the girl to start by asking her to introduce herself. She also began to ask about her age and habits, but the protagonist almost immediately noticed that in the questions of the mysterious girl from the dream, absolutely no confidence, which is characteristic of interviewers. The girl's name was Li Luli. She had not long ago turned 25 years old. The main character did not have many hobbies, because in her free time they were engaged in reading newspapers or watching television shows. Her strong point was calculation. The interviewer decided to ask a few more simple questions. For example, she was curious to know what level the main character's physical strength was at. Li Luli said that she had quite a healthy body. The stranger asked the girl how well she was able to adapt to new environments. Li Luli then admitted that she could probably survive even on a deserted island. The girls were then asked if she was good at lying. The protagonist said that she practiced such a thing because lying skills are very useful in today's society. Lastly, the interviewer asked the girl what she would do if she was told to marry a very handsome but very narcissistic man. Li Luli did not know how to answer such a strange question. She had never been asked such tricky questions about her personal tastes and preferences before when she was applying for a job. The protagonist asked if among the answers there was an option to simply not marry this unpleasant man. However, the interviewer was still interested to know how the girl would act in a similar situation if she was almost completely deprived of a choice. Li Luli decided to clarify how narcissistic the man was. The stranger said that when his fiancé was bedridden, he said that he didn't want to marry her because a sick girl couldn't be honored with his beautiful body. Said words seemed to the protagonist the craziest folly. She would be ready to organize an escape, only not to marry such a narcissistic insolent. You can't give disgusting men a chance. The interviewer laughed, for her idea was exactly the same. Then the stranger declared that all would surely be well if Li Luli happened to be in the body of the unfortunate bride whom fate would put before this difficult choice. The protagonist didn't understand what exactly the interviewer wanted to say. Suddenly, the stranger swooped right down with a hug on the girl. She apologized for such an early greeting because it was necessary to pay much more attention to this moment. The stranger from the dream said that her name was Albertina von Rosenberg. She was very pleased to meet Li Luli, for there would be many things that would bind them together in the future. The floor suddenly began to crack under her feet, and the girls fell down at the same time. Albertina said something to the protagonist, but her words were too difficult to make out because of the outside noise. The stranger asked Li Luli to replace her. From now on, everything had to depend on Li Luli. A whole week had passed since this mysterious encounter. On the first day when the protagonist woke up in a new body, there was a real chaos. People believed that the girl had become possessed because of a mysterious curse. Hearing these words, the protagonist felt that she had become a completely different person. The servants in the palace suggested that the girl's memory might have weakened due to a severe illness. The count had to give an order that his daughter's marriage be postponed for some time. The protagonist spent a short period of time in an unfamiliar place, knowing nothing. But there was something of which she was absolutely certain. It was Lady Albertina von Rosenberg. Obviously, because of the fact that this girl had a very tragic fate, the protagonist will have to feel the full weight of life and on her own skin. Albertina was like an object that previously had absolutely no value. But thanks to a special ingredient that raised the price, the girl gained some value. The protagonist felt that the Count had built up just such a hierarchical relationship with her. Albertina had always hated her father's birthday. Her own mother passed away, her stepmother was the Count's mistress and part-time half-sister. Weak from birth, the girl was given limited time, so these were all the facts that Liluli knew for sure. There was still a great deal of information left completely unknown to her. She wondered what Lady Albertine had expected, bringing a stranger from another world to her place. She had said that from now on, absolutely everything depended on Liluli. And what's more, she couldn't even find a solution to her problem, despite the fact that she had the ability to move other people's souls into her body. The protagonist should have pulled herself together, because life was gradually beginning to become more complicated. She had to think about what she could do to return to her home world. Perhaps the solution was right in front of her, but she did not see it because of her inner turmoil. The basic steps for taking action should be considered. It is important that Albertina did so because she must have had a dream and a goal to fulfill. It must have been worth it to fulfill her wish to be able to return home. First of all, one should learn about the wish and get to know Albertina's personality in more detail. Also, the girl should have familiarized herself with the new world in more detail, because understanding the structure of this universe played almost the most important role in her new life. It would be good if the protagonist learned to read, because there was not a single book in the library, the language of which she could understand. It was lucky that she was able to speak and take in information by ear. It would be great if someone could help her with this problem, but there were critically few well-wishers in this palace. Suddenly, the girl was distracted by hearing someone else's voice behind her back. The unfamiliar man introduced himself as Joseph and told Lady Albertina that she should immediately go downstairs to greet her guests. The girl was frightened, for she had never done such a thing in her world before. Moreover, the rules of ethics remained a mystery to her in a sense, wrapped in pitch darkness. As it turned out, her unscrupulous fiancé Killian came to visit. The protagonist was very surprised by such unexpected news, because she could not think that she could so quickly get acquainted with the impudent man who tormented Albertina. The head maid listed the names of several servants who would have to help the lady with the arrangements, while Sir Killian and the master talked. Those not named were to go to work in the kitchen. Elma was called out. The servants asked the girl if it would not be better if she went to the kitchen, for although she had been friendly with Albertina before, the lady had lately been weighed down by her presence. Now the girl should have acted wisely, for things had changed since she had ceased to receive special attention from the nobility. The maid told the servants not to talk and to hurry up with their work. The woman said there were enough people here so Elma could go to Albertina's room. The little girl politely declined, saying it would be better if she went to the kitchen and helped with the cooking. Many servants thought it was a good opportunity that Lady Albertina had lost her memories. For one thing, the girl once again had a chance to settle a complicated relationship with her fiancé Killian, although it seemed to the servants that the lady had recently become very cold towards other people. However, it was much more interesting to discuss the prince. Being related to the royal family made the young man stunning. The girls couldn't guess what flaws this guy might have, but Lady Albertina wasn't a fool either. Even if the young man was a member of the royal family, he was still a bastard, that is, an illegitimate child. The servants couldn't wait for the events between this couple to start actively developing, and they would have new topics of conversation. The protagonist tried to behave as normally and casually as possible so that no one would suspect the substitution. Since her memories were lost, it was impossible to create big problems in their family. The girl couldn't imagine what Albertina had done if everyone treated her so badly. In any case, the silence seemed quite depressing to the protagonist. The girl asked the young man why he had shown up here unannounced. Prince Killian said that he had warned her of his arrival, but that was when she was still in bed when she was dying. The young man assumed that his message never got through. The protagonist quickly came to the conclusion that this cheeky kid was completely unable to communicate with other people. The guy assumed that because of the long lying in bed, his interlocutor had lost her mind. It would be nice if there was nothing behind her memory loss. The young man also added that the girl now looks quite ridiculous, even worse than in previous times. The main character asked Prince Killian what he was trying to achieve with his rudeness. The young man tilted his head in surprise, so the girl assumed that she had said something strange or inappropriate to him. As it turned out, Killian was very much amused that Albertina called him a prince. With every second, this conversation seemed to the protagonist more and more annoying and unbearable. The girl tried to ignore his rudeness from the last efforts. Killian said that he liked it when the lady called him a prince, because at such moments, she looked very funny. After the meeting, Elma hurriedly ran up to her mistress. The girl began to ask if Prince Killian had insulted her. In fact, this child was the reason why the protagonist felt very uncomfortable throughout her stay in this mansion. The day Albertine woke up, this child was the only person who worried and cried for her. This friendship must have become a habit because the other person allowed it to happen. In other words, Elma was the only person who was that close to Albertina. For the same reason, the girl could easily recognize that her mistress was actually not who she claimed to be. As a noble lady, the protagonist was very grateful to the girl for liking her. But Albertina said that since she couldn't remember anything right now, Elma's favor was burdening her a bit. This girl wasn't even a member of her family, so the protagonist couldn't realize how truly close she was to this maid. So until Albertina got her memory back, she wanted to keep a certain distance with Elma. The distraught girl had no choice but to agree to her mistress's order. The protagonist once again felt guilty about another child being upset. The girl was truly sorry, however, she could not do otherwise. Especially, it would be much better for the child herself. There was no need to give her hope. Prince Killian suddenly turned to his bride. Albertina thought he had left, but it turned out that all this time he had been standing behind the wall and eavesdropping on her conversation with the little maid. It turned out that Killian had forgotten to mention one very important thing. He planned to stay here for about 5 more days. In the meantime, if he was satisfied that his bride was arriving in normal condition, he would travel to Lothar in order to notify the family of Albertina's recovery to prepare for their wedding. Of course, the protagonist in this case will also have to travel with her fiancé. This time the girl should be more careful not to get sick again. The prince notified Albertina as if it was something obvious. However, the girl had never made a promise that she would travel with him to Lothar. A week ago at the Roeder mansion, Prince Killian had told His Majesty that he had urgent news for him. Albertina von Rosenberg's condition had suddenly deteriorated for reasons unknown. The girl did not want the prince or anyone else to visit her. In case the Rosenbergs broke the contract, they wanted to discuss damages instead of apologizing. The angry king threw a pen right in the prince's face. His Majesty felt that this girl should have died before the marriage ceremony even began. The king used all sorts of curses to curse the Rosenberg family. They negotiated as if nothing had happened just because their daughter was dying. The king ordered the prince to go there quickly and bring him the princess. The most important thing in this situation is that this land will become Killian's territory. And this girl, even if she dies, will still not be able to go anywhere. The girl said that she never wanted to go anywhere with the prince. The young man asked Albertina if she didn't want to get out of this disgusting situation. Even her father tried to sell her. The prince told the lady that she probably didn't remember very much, so he kindly reminded Lady Rosenberg that she was only a small pawn in this wedding. All decisions, one way or another, were made by her father, for her voice in this house had absolutely no meaning to the rest of the family. It didn't matter what was going to happen. The girl just had to accept what was going on in her worthless life right now, so she should have been obedient and taken better care of her weak body so she wouldn't catch a new disease. Killian said that the girl shouldn't have resisted because it was completely useless. She only needed to be a good bride and fulfill her only function. Even if Albertina didn't like it, she had no choice or ability to change anything. Lastly, the young man told the girl to go to her chambers and rest properly before dinner. The protagonist felt very tired after meeting her fiancé. It seemed to her that she was about to go crazy. It would be better if she didn't know him at all. Albertina tried not to cry, but at the end, she couldn't hold back the tears. This life in a new world was very frustrating and driving her into despair. However, if the girl continued to be afraid, who knows what her fear would lead to? A servant girl knocked on Lady Albertine's door and told her that it was now dinner time. Upon seeing the mistress, the maid jumped aside fearfully. Her hair was disheveled and her dress was wrinkled. In a word, she did not look like a noblewoman from an orderly family. The maid began to insist that the girl could not go out like that. The servant promised Albertina to dress her in something simple, for they had little time before dinner. Coming out of her chambers, the protagonist noticed a child who was obviously her half-sister. It was their first meeting since Albertina woke up after a long illness. The girl bowed awkwardly in front of the little girl. She didn't know if she should go along with the girl to dinner or go first. At first glance, Albertina's father seemed to be a very benevolent family man. However, among his two sisters, he only singled out the younger Nilta, as he never had warm feelings for the older one. The mother told her daughter that she was being impolite, for she should greet her father when she met him. Nilta stepped forward guiltily and apologized to the count. The princess sat down next to Killian. It seemed as if Albertina's father was deliberately ignoring his eldest daughter's presence. He continued to question Nilta about the dress he had specially ordered for her. Looking at the little princess's clothes alone, one could realize how much her father loved her. Only after some time did the count apologize for being disrespectful to his guests. Albertina's father said that since everyone had come, it was safe to start dinner. The nobleman asked the prince if he would like to stay at the palace for another 15 days. His Majesty told Killian that he wished to make amends for the inconvenience his daughter had caused him. The father said that Albertina had only recently gotten out of bed. He wished he could give more of his daughter's things before he left, so as not to embarrass His Majesty. The prince was puzzled because of the fact that he had to wait a whole year for the wedding. The royal family started to get very worried if Killian's engagement was postponed due to any unfortunate circumstances. Therefore, to alleviate his family's worries, the prince wanted to bring Lady Albertina to his home as soon as possible. Especially, Killian was worried about the fact that he had been all alone for a year, since it had been so long since he had had intimacy with a woman. Listening to this conversation, the protagonist began to get very nervous. She really wanted to leave this place and forget about these unfriendly people, who played a very important role in her new life. When the girl returned to the chambers, she felt as if her life began to fill with a prickling pain. It was strange, since she hadn't eaten anything during dinner today. The girl's body threw a fever. Albertina wanted someone to give her a helping hand at such a difficult moment. However, the protagonist tried to set herself up that she would be able to cope with her problems on her own. It is even scary to think how Albertina used to cope with this loneliness. Everyone treated her as if she were some trinket that could be thrown away or sold at will. The protagonist's stomach began to ache even more. She thought that if she endured it, the discomfort would disappear sooner or later. The girl began to wonder if there was even one person in the palace who was worried about Albertina's fate. However, the protagonist remembered Elma. This girl was her only friend. Once in this world, Albertina was completely unaware of what would be waiting for her here. Even the disease did not give rest, but Elma was still there to provide help or support at any time. But Albertina decided that she could cope without her help. Moreover, the protagonist herself told her not to let the girl get in the way. The protagonist had to become more independent because otherwise it is almost impossible to survive in this dangerous world. That night, Albertina dreamed of one of the days when she was sick. The maids were discussing their mistress's health in whispers. They were suggesting that they should call a druid instead of a doctor. One of the maids was very frightened, for specialists of this kind instilled fear in her. Another girl asked her why she was so worried about Albertine. The servants assumed that she would hardly be treated as an equal in the royal palace. Most likely, she wouldn't even be able to last a month there with her temper and pernicious state of health. And for sure, if the worst happened, the Lord would simply kick Elma out of the mansion. Especially, there was practically no use from this girl, because she was too inept for a difficult job. The protagonist was very scared because of what was happening. Albertina had no idea how to get over this fear. She was in a place where absolutely no one was welcome to her. The girl felt like a real nothing in such a hostile environment. There were only wolves around the protagonist, and she looked like a simple sheep next to them. However, the girl was distracted from her thoughts when she heard a familiar voice nearby. The surprised girl asked who it belonged to. The voice continued to say that there was no need to be afraid, because she would be able to cope with all the obstacles. The protagonist suggested that it could belong to the real mistress of this body. The girl asked Albertina to stop, for she had so much to ask about this world. The protagonist was afraid that the true mistress of the body would be gone forever and never come back, leaving everything to fend for itself. However, the body mistress said that everything has its time. Upon waking up, the girl realized that her fever was gone and she felt much better. Joseph made a list of property for the Count, which will inherit Lady Albertina. However, the matter of the sale of the estate was not resolved because the advertisement had not yet been put up. The deeds would not take effect until after the wedding. Therefore, Albertina's father said that one could take their time as they would sort out all the problems after his daughter's departure. The servant also began to tell that he had made the lady's schedule with etiquette lessons and other classes in mind. However, the lord interrupted his subordinate, saying that he would be able to discuss Albertina's schedule with his wife. This was not news important enough to negotiate. The lord ordered a letter to be sent to the Roeder Manor as soon as possible. The servant obediently bowed and left the office to fulfill the errand. The protagonist asked if there was a lighter dress, because she didn't like that the expensive clothes were so heavy. She wanted to do without these excesses, for her health was still poor. The maids insisted that Lady Albertine should try on the dress she had chosen, for it was a perfect match for Prince Kilian's attire. Even her subordinates were concerned primarily with the prince's opinion. Elma was the only one who helped Albertina, but she wasn't around. So now many things had to be done by herself. Yesterday, the girl was revealed the truth that she was really just a bargaining chip in the hands of her father. Everyone thought so. Even to the servants it was no secret. Albertina ordered the servants to stop and called the butler to her. The girl stated that she could change her clothes on her own. The servants were not sure that the lady would be able to cope, because in addition to dressing, it was also necessary to deal with jewelry and hairstyle. The protagonist wanted to choose today's outfit on her own, but the servants continued to protest, wanting to continue to fulfill their work obligations. The girl didn't understand why she couldn't do such simple things on her own. Then the servant replied that the lady must look like a noble lady, for otherwise the lord would punish them. The servant asked why Albertina was still without makeup and hair. The protagonist asked not to blame the servants, as her renewed appearance was her personal initiative. She picked up today's outfit on her own. Moreover, the girl was not going to take into account someone else's tastes, if no one considered his opinion. The servant was surprised because, in his opinion, the chosen dress was inappropriate. He said that it looked too plain for Lady Albertina to wear in public. The girl didn't understand why she needed to wear makeup when the only things scheduled for today were etiquette lessons and a visit to the physician. Especially, the physician was not supposed to see Albertina in that beautiful dress, since it was meant for Prince Kilian. It was also okay not to wear makeup, as the young man did not care about her makeup or the clothes she wore. The servant did not back down, for he genuinely did not understand how a lady could present herself in such a manner to her fiancé. Albertina repeated that there was absolutely no use in luxurious garments. It seemed that the girl was absolutely not going to retreat from her point of view. The protagonist said that no one had informed her anything about the prince's presence. If she had known that she would have to meet Kilian, she would surely have chosen a more attractive outfit. The servant claimed that Lady Albertine was behaving inappropriately. The girl said she would gladly listen to his advice as long as it didn't sound like an order. The servants were surprised, for Albertina had never behaved in this way before. Everyone thought that the girl would be calmer after the loss of memory, but she continued to show her character. The protagonist said that the reputation of her family would in no way suffer. The current version of Albertina was from a different world altogether, and that meant she would survive in this world by her own methods. Her values were completely different, unlike those of these medieval people. The girl was a different person, and she was initially afraid that the others would find out. For the first 2 weeks, she lived in absolute fear. For sure, the disclosure of the secret would lead to very dire consequences. However, from that day on, the protagonist was no longer going to tolerate the humiliating treatment of her personality. The girl decided not to be afraid of the fact that she is completely different. From now on, she will be completely different, a new Albertina. And perhaps it will be good for her, because no one else will dare to wipe their feet on her. The servant realized that the lady would not be persuaded. The girl said that her father was not doing a good job if he could not even consider his daughter's wishes. Soon, a new Albertina will appear. The girl also added that she would like to discuss the schedule that was brought to her this morning. It seemed to the protagonist that there were a lot of flaws in it. Joseph hoped that the conversation would be very short, because the lady was late for her healer. The girl said that nothing would happen if the physician waited for her a little while. Albertina showed a desire to change some things in her life. First, the protagonist wanted to know what she would go through during etiquette lessons. The servant told the lady that she would be learning things that she would need for marriage, that is, rules of behavior. This was not enough for the protagonist at all. She felt that if she was to start studying something, she should emphasize all aspects of it, not things needed solely for marriage. Albertina told the servant that this kind of training did not suit her, and so she wanted something else. In addition to the rules of etiquette, she wanted to know the reason for marriage, and in every detail. She also wanted an introductory course in history and writing, for she had lost the use of her own language after her illness. The servant said they could not afford such a thing, for they had no time for such foolishness. Joseph did not want to listen to the princess at all. Albertina didn't see it as a problem because she was good at absorbing information. Especially if the schedule is not revised, the girl will still refuse to attend the chosen classes, so Joseph still thought about her request. The servant had not expected this turn of events. He continued to insist that marriage etiquette alone would be more than enough for her education. Albertina said that by her ignorance, she would shame her family's reputation. That is, the protagonist's education must be in the best interest of the house. The servant didn't even have the right to argue that Albertina was wrong in this situation. If everything is properly scheduled, the girl will definitely manage to learn all the necessary information in time. The servant said that today the mistress is behaving quite strangely. The girl asked the man if he didn't think she was suggesting very reasonable things necessary for the good reputation of their family, especially since the girl was not asking for much, but only for some changes that could be arranged very easily if desired. Suddenly, the landlady of the mansion appeared. The woman stated that she would allow Lady Albertina's schedule to be changed. The servant awkwardly apologized, for he was unaware of her presence. The mistress said it was fine. Especially in her opinion, Albertina was absolutely right about the situation. Marriage etiquette alone wouldn't be enough, so other useful activities should be added to the schedule as well. Grafina said that she no longer wished to hear any more objections from the servant. Joseph stated that he would get right on it after he had sorted out the rest of his affairs. Nevertheless, the mistress insisted that it must be attended to at once. Seizing the opportunity, the protagonist decided to add one more thing. The annoyed servant asked what else the young lady might need. The girl asked not to punish the servants because they were not to blame for the fact that she wanted to wear a different dress. The girl was very surprised that she was finally able to show her strength and complex character. Albertina was able to pull herself together and defend her position. Now the protagonist knew that if she got a chance, she would undoubtedly try to grasp it. A beginning had been made. Albertine now felt completely different. The girl was so bold that she even asked her mistress if she could see to it that Joseph did not punish the maids, because it was of great importance to her. The protagonist was well aware of how rash her decision had been, so she would be very grateful to the mistress of the house for her help. Countess was surprised that the lady cared so much about the fate of her maids. Albertina said that punishment would only be appropriate if they were irresponsible in their work. The mistress promised that in that case, the servants would not be punished. The protagonist confessed that it was she who refused to wear the dress she had chosen. That is, the servants were merely carrying out her will. Irresponsibility had nothing to do with it, because they were not to blame. Joseph, however, saw the situation from a completely different perspective. In addition, the servants themselves dissuaded the lady from her obsession. The girl was sickened by the mere thought that all must obey one man, that is the count, but it was almost impossible to do anything about it. The mistress of the house was sincerely surprised at the stepdaughter's position. The protagonist only wanted to do the best, so that no one would suffer because of the decisions she made. Only Albertina should be responsible for her actions. The girl noticed that the mistress was clearly upset after the words she said. The woman didn't want to linger here any longer. All the more, Albertina had to follow to the druid and the healer. The girl now had to hurry to the living room so as not to be late for the examination. The protagonist asked the mistress if she would like to go with her. However, the mistress of the house refused, for she had other, much more important things to do at the moment. The mistress spoke of how she had much more to do. Albertina said that the girl should not apologize, for she did not hold a grudge against her at all. It didn't make sense, as the girl was only trying to stifle her guilt. Albertina said that mistress should just keep standing her ground. The mistress thought about the fact that even after losing her memory, the protagonist managed to keep her character. The healer asked the girl if she had been bothered by any pains lately, such as panting or bleeding. Albertina said that yesterday she had encountered a slight abdominal pain and fever, but by morning the ailment had completely passed without the slightest trace of it. The doctor was glad to hear that the girl was fine now, especially since the young lady's appearance had improved considerably over the past few years. Albertina's eyes had become more lively, and in addition there was a slight blush on her cheeks, and there was no pain in her chest, which indicated that the health of her lungs had completely returned to normal. The healer told the girl that she should start exercising and gradually increase the load. Albertina was surprised at how quickly the medical examination was over. The healer said that if the girl had no illnesses or psychological problems, it meant that he could only bow out in this situation. The aide asked his master for formalities and did not say anything unnecessary to the noblewoman. As expected, the level of medical advancement had increased a lot recently. Doctors began to worry about the hygiene of their patients and also check their nervous system. The girl was glad that everything was not so bad. Previously, the protagonist feared the horrors of medieval medicine. The maid asked the healer to stay in order to make a report. The count personally asked for this, because he wanted to familiarize himself with the results of the examination of his daughter in more detail. The physician said he would write everything down, since neither the count nor the countess deigned to come to see his daughter. The maid said that the gentleman was actually very concerned about Albertina's condition. The assistant also stated that the young lady's condition seemed very strange at first sight. The young man doubted that a patient who was actually lying at death could recover so easily. Previously, no methods had helped Albertina. It was assumed that the girl simply could not survive after such a strong disease. The course of treatment can be difficult to predict. The healer said that even if the disease went away of its own accord, then it is necessary to be sure to mention it in the report. Health is a very unpredictable thing that is sometimes very difficult to control. The assistant could not be discouraged, for the disease was incurable. Suddenly, a young man appeared who said that guesswork and arguments would not help in this situation. The stranger said that the disease was rare, but that did not mean that it was incurable. The young man also wanted to say something about the mistress's mother. However, the maid interrupted the druid because it was not permissible to talk about such things. So the maid advised the young man to mind his own business and not stick his nose where it shouldn't be. The protagonist was embarrassed because the druid looked directly into her eyes. The young man smiled affectionately and asked his mistress if she remembered who he was. He introduced himself, identifying himself as a druid of the Aaron family, better known as a pilgrim. One of the priests who had served the Rosenberg family for 13 generations. His name was Testa. It seemed to the girl as if everything was happening out of thin air. Testa said that if the girl didn't want to address him as pilgrim, she could call him druid. Albertina suggested that she too should introduce herself to the stranger. However, the young man said that they had known each other for a long time. The girl couldn't believe that someone was addressing her with such warmth in his voice. Testa asked the protagonist if he could have a private conversation with her. Albertina was surprised at such a suggestion. The young man didn't know where to start the conversation. Testa said that after death, absolutely every soul goes to heaven to await its new life. That's the way things work. The girl didn't understand why the druid started talking about rebirth. Testa added that people who, by virtue of their self-interest, touch the cursed gift, cannot be in heaven. Ni will remain on earth even after their death in the guise of evil spirits. These creatures devour the souls of people, taking possession of their bodies. After that, a person begins to lose his reason and his mind becomes cloudy. The awareness of life is lost. And when the thoughts finally fade, the person dies. Then the evil spirit leaves the victim and starts looking for a new victim. So all these stories about rebirth and evil spirits were not really fiction. As a priest, Testa could banish these dangerous creatures. That was why he had come here, to make sure that the girl's soul was not possessed by dark forces. Testa asked Albertina if he could take her hand. The protagonist was frightened, because perhaps in this way the young man could learn that now in this body was a completely different person, not related to the family of the Count. The girl had no idea what she should do in this situation. Noticing the trembling, the young man said that Albertina should not worry about anything. He assured the girl that it would not hurt. The protagonist noticed the purest golden light right in front of her. The druid made sure that nothing was tormenting the mistress's soul. The maid told Testa that she would tell the Count everything. The girl was afraid that the druid would leave so immediately with his precious knowledge, which could be very useful. The girl wanted to talk to him again because he had important information. The protagonist certainly had to find out why her soul, arriving in someone else's body, was so pure and clear. Albertina suddenly grabbed the priest and asked what exactly he meant. The girl persistently asked him about how he realized that her soul was not possessed by an evil spirit. Moreover, the lady wondered what must happen to the soul for something wrong to happen to her. The druid awkwardly asked the girl to calm down and let him explain everything calmly. It was only after a while that the protagonist realized that she had acted very irrationally because of her panic. The girl began to apologize because for her such things were unusual. The prince sat aside and muttered something about the manners of his bride. The druid, who had not expected his explanation to be too obscure, said that he should have explained everything in more detail to the young lady from the beginning. The young man apologized to the young lady for making her worry. Then Testa began to explain that with his powers he had managed to touch Albertina's soul. With a pure soul, the light is always golden. In one possessed by an evil spirit, it would be purple. It's like a litmus test for the soul. Then the protagonist wondered if the druid would be able to understand if the soul was possessed by a person other than an evil spirit. However, Albertina came to the conclusion that it was not worth asking about such a thing for the time being, because such an interest could arouse suspicion in Testa. The girl thought that if she was not an evil spirit, then one could not worry about the druid finding out anything. The maid interrupted the mistress, because of the complicated schedule, the protagonist had no time for meaningless conversations. After the second breakfast, etiquette lessons should immediately begin. You must never be late for them without a proper reason. The maid told Lady Albertina that she was already keeping Sir Killian too long. The prince, out of politeness, said it was all right, so no attention should be paid to him. Branch could wait, for Killian was primarily interested in the health of his bride. Besides, Mrs. Rosenberg was busy, so no one was expecting them today. It turned out that the protagonist would have breakfast alone with the prince. Of course, such a prospect seemed to her very unfavorable. Seeing the displeasure on his young lady's face, Callian said that she should spend more time studying manners. The carriage that was to take the druid to the village was waiting at the gate. Before leaving, the young man turned to Lady Albertina. Testa said that from the south gate of the palace, there is a road that goes straight into the village. Among the houses stood a building with a blue roof and white flowers on the door. It was the druid's house. The young man told Albertina that if she needed his help, she could come to him anytime. The druid slowly touched the girl's head. Suddenly, the protagonist became convinced that his compassion was a sign of goodwill. The girl thanked the pilgrim. The young man asked Albertina to be lenient and ignore his obsession. A feeling arose in the girl's heart which she could not explain. Sitting at the meal, the servants were discussing how much they were bored with their work. Tomorrow was going to be very busy. They had already been working like the damned for 5 days. Only the maids could be worse. The main character was very surprised to learn that the wedding ceremony would last for 7 days. The wedding itself will be held in 1 day, but for the next 6 days the walls of the palace will receive guests. This is the tradition of the Roeder family. After all, this is Prince Killian's own wedding. It's unusual for Albertine, but you can't do anything about tradition. The emperor regarded his half-brother with affection, so he wished his wedding to be held at the highest level. The Rotar themselves demanded that the marriage ceremony follow their traditions, for Killian's consort should be the future ruler of Edelwald. Once the ceremony was over, Albertina would be changed into traditional attire and taken to her new lands. The girl couldn't believe how stark everything was. Edelward is located in the northeast of Blundern. Most of the borders are blocked by the sea, causing strong leashes. This land is very dear to the Rosenberg family, so it is worth protecting. The protagonist had no right to inherit them. Only the eldest of the Rosenberg sons can receive them. Albertina's future children do not inherit either. They would have to be given away when the proper heir appeared. The girl tried to convince herself that her life was not as bad as it might seem at first glance. The protagonist noticed that when she was alone with the owner of the house, everything was completely different. It all seemed so strange. The Rosenberg estate is very large, and everyone mostly sat in their chambers. Their family could go for days without seeing each other. Sometimes it seemed like everyone was avoiding each other on purpose. You always need a special reason to meet. No one would take the time to just talk, not even a mother and daughter. No one wanted to talk to Albertina since she had another blood mother. But things are very different now. At least the protagonist wasn't treated as hostile as before. A maid knocked on the door. She asked if she had interrupted the class with her presence. The countess said it was all right, for they were already finishing their business. The mistress suggested that Albertina take a short break and continue her training in the afternoon. At that time, the young lady could enjoy a stroll down the street. However, the maid stopped the girl, saying that she had a few questions for her. It turned out that a list of gifts had been sent in the morning. The Rotar family's gifts had been moved to the guest room in the west wing. The rest were in the east barn. The countess said to double-check everything by tomorrow morning. Then the maid told her that the guest list had not yet been approved. The landlady was surprised, as the butler had earlier claimed that the problem had been solved. The maid said that it was necessary to ask Lady Albertina's opinion. The countess had nothing against it, so she left them alone. The girl was surprised, because before her opinion played absolutely no role. Albertina asked the maid what she wanted from her. It turned out that the maid wanted to talk about Elma. The maid was concerned that lately Albertina had begun to avoid the little girl. The maid asked the lady if she had any desire to take Elma with her. The teacher said that it was possible to finish, because Nilta without any problems grasped on the fly all the necessary information. This girl was the real treasure of the Rosenberg family. Nilta said that without the lessons, she would not have known so much. The maid asked the mistress if she was hungry. The girl admitted that she would like to get some fresh air now. It was necessary to take a little walk before dinner. Nilta finally had a chance to take off her shoes. The girl hoped that no one noticed her bare feet. The young lady hid under a small tree. Nilta couldn't believe that ladies wore such uncomfortable shoes on a regular basis. The girl would not want to wear something like that in the future. Suddenly, Nilta noticed her sister's maid running past. Elma was screaming to be left alone immediately. To understand the reason for what happened, one must go back, specifically to this morning. Having finished with their work, the servants went to rest. The servant girls began to mock little Elma. They asked if she was doing a good job. Evil spirits devour the human body from within. For such creatures, there are obstacles that prevent them from sowing endless evil. One of them was the scorching midday sun. Therefore, the main holiday for them is the eclipse. The most dangerous place which captured these spirits were, hiding from the light, forests. Perhaps that is why all doomed and evil people, lepers and bandits, who destroy all the foundations, are drawn to the forests. The maids asked the girl if she was afraid of damaging her expensive clothes. After these words, the maids deliberately wiped their hands on Elma's clean shirt. The girl said that she didn't even know what to wear, so that no one would start harassing her about meaningless little things. The maids told Elma that it was not appropriate for her to wear such a flashy dress. The little girl was tired of explaining that maids should always look neat. The maid said that Elma must have run out of good excuses. There was no one else to protect the little girl since the mistress had given up on her. Elma said that she didn't need protection. The maidservants continued to sarcasm and insult her. A servant girl stated that without Albertina's protection, Elma was nothing. Fortune had long ago turned away from her. The girl still hoped that things could be the same after the return of her mistress's memory. However, after Albertina married and started a new life in another mansion, they would no longer have anything to do with each other. In the maid's opinion, a splinter like Elma was long overdue to be gotten rid of. The maid said that it would be better for the girl if the mistress did not wake up at all, because in that case, they would show pity to her and would not abuse her too much. Unwilling to listen to the insults of others, Elma ran away. The maids ran after her. Albertina told Elma that if someone offends her, they should in no way give themselves to be offended. Not everyone in this world is pure of heart, so you cannot lose yourself and stay on their own. Having caught up with the girl, the maids decided that it was time to teach her a lesson. The girl grabbed Elma by the dress and said that people like her should not be in this estate at all. The girl stated that at least she wasn't as nasty as those maids. It was very low to bully someone who just can't give you a proper fight back. Elma said that the maids had no right to touch her, since they had no idea who they were messing with. Suddenly, the young mistress intervened in the fight. The girl asked how long she would have to put up with these annoying fights between the maids. Of course, everyone was very surprised by Nilta's presence. She didn't care about their infighting, but she demanded that it stop. It was unlikely the Earl could like their behavior. The maid apologized to the young lady and said that her subordinates would definitely be punished for the unpleasant incident. Nilta said that there was no need to apologize to her. However, her father would definitely punish the servants severely for such shameless behavior. Therefore, the girl asked the maid to handle it on her own and pick the most appropriate punishment. However, if Nilta's father found out, this trifle would turn into a serious problem. The young mistress hoped that she would never witness silly fights between maids again. The maid assured the mistress that this was the last time. The girl said it was time for her to return, however. She had sprained her leg not too long ago. Nilta wanted a servant to escort her. The maid offered to call a healer, but the girl refused, as all she needed was to get to her quarters and get some rest. The maid asked Elma to escort the young mistress and then return, for they still needed to discuss the punishment. Nilta began to waddle very badly. Elma asked if perhaps she should carry mistress in her arms while no one could see. The maid lifted Nilta into her arms. The little noblewoman was surprised, for she could not believe that an ordinary girl could be so strong. Nilta thought that without Albertina's help, Elma would have been lost long ago. The little noblewoman asked the girl if she hated her. Elma replied with a surprised look that she treated her mistress with the same reverence as Albertina. The maid said that she did not want to discuss the subject further, as she might get in trouble for it. Wanting to change the subject, Elma thanked her mistress for stopping those evil girls. The maid did not regret that blow, but she did not want Lady Nilt to think that such an act was the right thing to do, for one must always be aware of one's actions. Elma lowered the lady to the floor, for there were many servants on the floor above. Nilta told the maid that she was grateful to her, because before Albertina felt very lonely in this empty manor. The little noblewoman also told the maid that if she wished to leave the palace, she would make sure she had enough money. Elma asked the mistress why she was so kind to her. Nilta said to consider it their treaty. The maid was surprised, for she had no intention of even leaving Albertina. The maid said that since such behavior was unacceptable in the palace, Nilta would have to spend 4 whole days locked up. As it was, she wouldn't be able to see Lady Albertina's last days at the Rotar Manor. The maid also added that she would have to deduct the girl's daily wages, though the others demanded that she be given a harsher punishment for fighting. Elma said that they deserved that blow. The maid felt very frustrated that the girl couldn't behave appropriately. It wasn't even about those maids, because she treated absolutely all the maids like that. Elma said that she didn't want to get along with such people, and if it weren't for the mistress, she would have left this palace long ago to find a job in a better place. The little maid despised and criticized them, for they looked at Albertina as if she were some kind of lowlife. Yet their shameless behavior, for some reason, they always got away with it. The maid was covering for them, but she was not even going to think about the mistress's well-being. The maid asked the girl what she would do after mistress left. Elma was sure that Albertina would not dare to leave her behind. As it turned out, while the girl was fighting with the servant, the maid had time to talk to the mistress and ask her if she was going to take Elma with her. Lady Albertine refrained from her suggestion. It meant nothing less than that Elma would have to stay in this palace. Whatever it was that bound them together, the lady had long since forgotten about it. No matter how strong that friendship between noblewoman and maid had been, it was long gone. Perhaps Albertina will take Elma away when she gets her memory back, but it will be a long wait until then. Then the girl will have to follow the rules and stop fighting with the others. It can be considered that from this day, Elma became the most ordinary servant, having absolutely no privileges in this palace. The maid really hoped that the girl would be able to fulfill the obligations imposed on her. However, if the girl did not like it, then she could easily leave this estate to start from scratch and earn a living in the desired way. Mrs. Rosenberg was very grateful to Elma for her loyal service to Lady Albertina. It was the girl's favorite tale, Elma and Taniki. The girl's mother always referred to her as the main character. Lady Albertina loved the tale too. She said that Taneke was her nickname, but only those closest to her could use it. The day came when the protagonist had to leave Rotar. The countess was preparing her stepdaughter for the ceremony. The mistress told Albertina to try again, because it is worth considering that when she puts on a wedding dress, it will be much harder to move than usual. The protagonist obediently carried out all the instructions. It was a little difficult for the girl to memorize all the instructions. Albertina wanted this horror to end as soon as possible. The countess told the girl to remember that it was very dangerous to be in the forest. It is not enough to be just vigilant, because in this place there could be a lot of terrible incidents, with which the protagonist with all desire could not cope. Therefore, even if Albertina was in a safe zone, she was not allowed to fight off the general formation, as well as being alone. Also, under no circumstances was it allowed to approach strangers, even if they seemed quite friendly at first glance. The countess asked the girl if she had memorized the faces of all the attendants. However, instead of listening to the instruction, the protagonist stared blankly at the floor. The girl said that she had only seen the guards coming here once, so she hadn't managed to memorize them properly. The countess said that it was not necessary to memorize their names, but the most important thing was that Albertina was able to navigate among familiar faces. The kingdom of Rotar, holding a wedding ceremony. The road to the prince's homeland lay only through a dangerous forest. As mentioned earlier, it was very unsafe to set foot in such places without special preparation, as dangerous, malevolent spirits often dwell there. Entering the forest was not particularly dangerous, but with each passing Mashan into the depths, more and more terrifying spirits began to appear among the trees. It was also very easy to encounter wild beasts, most of which were infested with evil spirits. It was said that this forest could be passed through without much loss, however, if it wasn't that dangerous. Before, what were these special measures for? Suddenly, someone knocked on the door of the chambers. The maid announced that it was time to depart. The countess told Albertina to go down together. The girl said there was no need. However, the countess thought quite differently because she was worried about their kind, so it is necessary to personally greet the guests. As it turned out, in order to make the journey safely, the count had summoned a druid. He was to share the power that would briefly block the path of the evil spirits. The druid said it was his duty to help people who wished to cross the forest. Unfortunately, other than Testa, no one else had any desire to help Albertine. It turned out that Pilgrim, who usually escorts people through the Rosenberg's territory, had a hiccup in his schedule. Therefore, Pilgrim had to fulfill those duties in his place. The countess said they were honored and would never forget the kindness of the druid. The young man asked my lady if she needed any help. The girl said that she had not chosen a maid for herself, so it was necessary to have another person join their trip. The tired protagonist decided to take a little break before dinner. Due to her bad mood, Albertina couldn't even get a piece of food down her throat. There were too many strange thoughts in the girl's head. She did not know how to do the right thing. The protagonist was worried about what would happen to this body after her return to her world. Apparently, Albertina's spirit was sleeping somewhere far away. The protagonist didn't know if it would be able to return back to her body after waking up. It would be a good ending, however. It was likely that Albertina had long since died, which was why she had summoned someone suitable to take her place. There was always the possibility that the protagonist simply had to replace her soul in this body. Elma pondered as she lay in bed. Even the kitchen was busy today. There were still suitcases to pack to load tomorrow, after all. The girl did not want to do anything right now, as her soul was gnawed by the resentment associated with the fact that even for the mistress, she was an empty place. Elma bitterly recalled Albertina's words. Earlier, the girl had thought that things could get better if she just waited. Elma's longest-lasting memory was the smell of grass and earth drenched with dew. The girl always felt as if she had to spend her whole life running away from some terrible things that were persistently trying to catch up with her. Elma lived her every day with a depressing sense of fear. However, it was hard for this child to even remember what she was truly running away from. Her constant attempts to hide became a means of self-defense. Elma instinctively tried to run away from anything repulsive. She didn't know what else she could do about it. Sneaking up with great vigilance, the child suddenly bumped into someone. Elma spotted a girl crying. The stranger asked the little girl why she was in such a dangerous place. The girl decided that she should go to Taneka and ask her to take her with her. Elma could be compared to anyone, but only she knew what Albertine truly wanted. After all, even though her memory was lost, her tastes still shouldn't have changed. It was scary to start from the beginning, but the girl was confident that she would be able to get used to the castle without any problems. Elma was going to persuade her mistress by any means necessary. The girl tried to find her mistress, but for some reason she was nowhere to be found. Elma assumed that Albertina might have gone to lunch. Suddenly the girl spotted her mistress from the window. At last, she managed to find Lady Albertina. Elma began to run with all her legs, however. At one of the turns, she accidentally crashed into Prince Kilian. His Highness's maid began to get angry because the girl could not run through the corridors where such highly respected people walked. Apparently, Rosenberg did not know how servants should be properly trained. Not wanting to deal with this, the young man ordered the servants to go and check the place of today's dinner. The prince asked the little maid if she was looking for Albertina. Bowing down, Elma began to apologize to His Highness for her rudeness and sloppiness. Kilian believed that sooner or later the moment would come when Albertina would deem this girl useless and get rid of her. The girl declared that regardless of other people's opinions, she would under no circumstances leave her mistress. Elma thought that this guy was acting like a real idiot. She did not want to think about the stupid things he said to her. The girl thought that Albertina had suffered a lot since their first meeting. Therefore, Elma was often haunted by the thought that sooner or later the mistress would leave her because of illness. However, the girl could not even think that Madame would leave her in her lifetime. Therefore, Elma was certainly going to convince Albertina that she should take her with her. The girl admitted that she was mistaken. Previously, the mistress had treated her maid as a very valuable person, so now she wanted to repay the same. However, Elma could not even think that with her behavior, she would press on the closest person. Now the girl understood why Albertina was trying to keep her distance. She could handle it. So, making one last test of her luck, Elma asked the lady if she would allow her to go with her. The maid promised that she would try to improve her manners and speech. The girl was ready to change absolutely everything in herself, just to please the lady. The protagonist approached the distressed girl to comfort her. Albertina said that she did not need to apologize, because she was absolutely not guilty of anything. The lady believed that her little maid would be able to cope with absolutely any difficulties. However, the problem was that the protagonist did not want to feel remorse. Albertina did not want to say it out loud, because at such a moment it was very difficult to talk about such things. Seeing the doubts on her mistress's face, Elma continued to say that she would cope with all the difficulties. Of course, there were things that were given to her with difficulty, but for the sake of Albertina could do anything. The girl tearfully begged her mistress not to leave her. She was afraid to be alone again. Giving in to temporary weakness, Albertina told Elma that they could go together. The protagonist was to make any concession for the sake of not seeing the children's tears. That night, the protagonist could not sleep at all. She tried to assure herself that absolutely everything was fine. She needed to take Elma with her, because the new palace would surely need a loyal servant. Everything will be wonderful until the girl does not guess that next to her is not the real Albertine, but just a shell left from that girl. The protagonist took a risky step, choosing the best thing she could do in the situation. Thought that if she acted in this way, everything could change. But in the end, things stayed the same. The girl realized that she was stuck in this world forever. Albertina heard someone knocking on her door. The protagonist got out of bed to find out who wanted to see her at such a late hour. It turned out to be the Countess. The woman apologized for showing up so late and uninvited. As it turned out, the Countess in her hands was holding a thing that had to be urgently handed over to the girl. It was a Rosenberg family heirloom, a sign passed by inheritance to the owner of Edelwald. The type of seal seemed quite simple to the protagonist. Opening it, the girl noticed a compass inside. The Countess began to talk about the fact that the forest through which Albertine will move is full of magic. From the moment a stranger set foot there, he would not be able to get out of the sea of trees. It is no wonder that after such walks, the thicket is rapidly replenished with new corpses who manage to escape from the trap. Therefore, the girl certainly needed a landmark, with the help of which it will be possible to find the right way. The Countess told Albertina that if she had this thing with her, she would never get lost in the forest. The compass was originally supposed to be given to Edelwald, but the Countess would have felt more comfortable if it had been in the girl's hands from the beginning of the journey. The mistress of the manor also added that the thing should be hidden so that it would not be seen by anyone. The protagonist bluntly asked why exactly she should keep this thing. The Countess admitted that she was worried. Especially if the value of Albertine is increased, its security will also increase. The girl asked the mistress whose side she was on. The Countess didn't have time to answer, as the protagonist changed her price almost immediately. Albertina assumed that her father must not know about it. In any case, the girl was confident that she could handle this small problem. However, the protagonist continued to worry because of the fact that someone might have accidentally noticed the thing. The Countess said that it wasn't a significant enough thing to worry about. But the protagonist couldn't understand the reason for Madame's action, because it was clear that she didn't intend to trap or trick her. The Countess thought that there was no point in making excuses now anyway, even if it might be a lie to deceive Albertina. The protagonist didn't want to think it was a lie. Especially, it was clear that this man did not wish to harm Albertina. The girl once again asked the Countess how much loyalty she had to her. The mistress said that she could only look away now, lest her eyes cross with hers. That was her limit. It was late enough, yet Albertina asked the Countess if she could learn her name. Perhaps they would never be able to meet in person again. The woman said her name was Nina. After introducing herself, she quickly left the chambers so as not to indulge in memories again. The Countess threw herself on the floor. The woman hoped that the comfort she received in this way would be a remission of her sins. The mistress prayed that the ghost of the girl's mother would recede, for now her 20-year-old daughter was in perfect health. Repenting, the Countess continued to mentally address the late Martha. Nilta was very sad that her half-sister was leaving the palace for good. The girl could only hope that she would feel much better in her new place. Upon waking up, the girl discovered the fact that she had missed the right station on the subway. Returning home after a hard day's work, the protagonist asked her appa if they had anything edible in the refrigerator. The girl looked into the young man's room and found him sleeping. Li Luli didn't feel like waking him up, so she politely apologized for the noise. The young man offered to order something from the food, but the protagonist was not thrilled with the idea because they had almost no money for extra expenses. The girl said that now she would cook kimchi jjigae and then go to work. Then the guy directly asked Li Luli why she didn't want to quit one of her part-time jobs. The protagonist assumed that if her brother was saying such things, it could mean that he could get a raise this month. However, the young man didn't see anything funny about it, because his sister was looking worse and worse every day because of her hard work. Li Luli shouldn't have been so stressed out, because their financial condition wasn't so dire that any of the family members started to burden themselves with hard labor. The girl did not see anything wrong with her lifestyle, because many young people were forced to spend all their free time to earn money. Moreover, Li Luli was only going to live like this until her brother found a good job. The girl would be very worried if she failed to provide a good life for her brother. For her, his personal well-being was her priority. Li Luli warned her brother to feed her little sister and also make sure she didn't skip school. The girl also asked the young man if he called the nurse today. The protagonist, because of the large amount of work, forgot to contact her on her own. Then the brother said that the girl should not worry, because now she is Albertina. The girl had a dream in which absolutely everyone called her an imposter who took over someone else's body. Elma asked the girl who she really was. The protagonist began to justify herself, because she never wanted to find herself in such a situation. Albertina woke up abruptly after her nightmare. Next to her sat Elma and asked her mistress if she was all right. Noticing that the girl was not in a good mood, the maid immediately apologized for waking her up without permission. Elma suggested that the girl might have been feeling ill due to motion sickness. In that case, Albertina should have slept a little longer. Elma promised that she would wake her mistress a little later. All the preparations were finished. The servant said that as soon as dawn came, he would set off at once. Joseph said that now only Edelwald's representative had arrived for the inspection as his wife was delayed in traveling. The Count said that for that reason it was worth waiting a little longer. Albertina's father opened a scroll which conveyed that Reinberger was also delivering news of my lady's wedding. This, however, was a protest against her. The servant stated that things were getting worse after Reinberger. Because of this, even after Martha's death, it was noble that the Count maintained an alliance with the Rosenbergers. It was a big help when they bargained with the Rotars. The Count said that it was more than helpful. He then asked his servant why he wouldn't want to treat him more kindly, if only before he left. Joseph spoke to him quite arrogantly. The servant asked if the lady would be able to adjust to the Rotars' moods. Obviously, one could see the purpose of it all, but Edelwald was a very important place to them. The Count interrupted Joseph, calling his words too indecent. Albertina's father said that Rotar was the idiot who paid the Association of Researchers to find information. The protagonist felt as if Vona was about to die. The girl was sure that she would definitely not want to repeat such a trip a second time. Elma handed Albertina a medicine that was supposed to help with vomiting. The girl asked the lady if she was feeling better now. The druid said that any person who would rush at that speed would definitely get sick. However, they had no choice, for they had to get to safety before dark. The protagonist asked the abbot if it wouldn't be much safer if they moved at night, since spirits usually gathered during daylight hours. The druid said that such things were hard to explain, as it was much easier to understand spiritual phenomena if one had the opportunity to observe them from childhood. The girl felt as if she were being rebuked for her lack of knowledge. Testa began to apologize excitedly for his rudeness, for in fact, he had meant quite the opposite. The druid agreed that the spirits were in the forest during daylight hours, but it was more of a forced attachment than a normal habit. Evil spirits appear anywhere. Mostly they travel to dark places where daylight does not enter. Testa said that spirits can be avoided through two magical things. First, by using magic that binds dark entities during the sun's glow. Second, the magic of Hesperia, which appears as the sun sets over the horizon, works well. A window in a pearl tree appears in the nest where the doors and walls are lined. It lets the light of the evening star inside. Then the veil of tree foliage disappears. Elma is quoted saying, "Let my existence be tranquil." It's a famous enough phrase. That was why the magic was called the supplication of the evening star. The girl said that my lady had once taught it to her. The protection given by a druid is not a power that can last for a long time. So if Albertina can't make it out of the forest before sunset, she can take cover. The ancient pearl tree is a kind of guide. It creates safe zones with boundaries when there is danger of evil spirits advancing. Testa told the lady that if she couldn't find the wagon, she would need to get close to the pearl tree and stand next to it. This was one of the basic rules of safety in the forest. Elma said that was why, when there was a long journey ahead, they traveled in a wagon that had only one window. Its shape and structure was made mixed with pearlwood. This power that affected the entire world seemed like something unbelievable. People watched with admiration as the boundaries were erected in the safe zone. Testa said that they should not let their guard down, for the borders had no effect on wild beasts. The druid said he would inspect the rest of the areas in their safe zone and then head back, sometime before dawn. The young man once again warned the protagonist to stay out in case the sun came up. The boundary and aid are only temporary phenomena. The effectiveness of magic is greater and more reliable. The girl felt ashamed because of her earlier failure to realize such obvious things about magic. This world was completely different. The girl felt behind as she could not understand the pace of the new life. Suddenly, the servants heard a strange sound from the direction of the forest. Something was approaching their carriage. Elma ran to the source of the unfamiliar sound. The druid was worried, for because he was half a day late, the barrier had disappeared. The young man hoped that he would be able to accomplish what he had planned before sunset. There were 3 more places left to process. Testa felt very tired, but one had to keep moving. After all, the barriers were temporary. There shouldn't be any problems over the next few days, but the young man would still feel more at ease if a priest joined him. Through magic, someone managed to contact Pilgrim. The voice said that the protective barrier of the 13th district of Rosenberg could be replaced today. It went on to say to contact the person in charge of the job and give all the coordinates needed.